Madam President, we thank the acting UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, Ramiz Al-Akbarov, and the High Representative of the Peace Council for Gaza, Nikolai Mladenov, for their briefings. We also listened attentively to Ms. Athena Rayburn. Madam President, the assessments delivered today attest to the dangerous trajectory of the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory, with all the ensuing tragic consequences for both sides of the conflict and the region as a whole. The events of recent months clearly demonstrate that the lack of progress on the Palestinian-Israeli track threatens further suffering and loss of civilian life, along with the escalation and emergence of new flashpoints across the entire Middle East. We all recall how the majority in this chamber pinned their hopes on Security Council Resolution 2803 in support of Donald Trump's peace plan for the Gaza Strip to pave the way toward ending violence in the region. We would also like to remind you that our country, largely at the request of our friends in the Arab Muslim world, chose not to impede the adoption of this document. At the same time, we provided a detailed analysis of all the pitfalls inherent in such a hasty decision by the Council, warning of the risks of ignoring the broadly recognized international legal framework for the Middle East settlement, chief among which is the two-state solution. The fact that active international mediation efforts succeeded in halting large-scale bloodshed in Gaza is undeniable and deserves full support. Regrettably, however, it remains premature to speak of a lasting peace in the Strip. Ceasefire violations in Gaza and the killing of Palestinians continue systematically 10 months after the formal entry into force of the agreements. This clearly illustrates the statistics. The death toll from Israeli attacks since October 10, 2025, is approaching the 1,300 mark. As evident from daily UN reports, severe difficulties persist on the humanitarian track as well. The Israeli occupation and restrictions on the entry of aid and construction materials have placed the enclave's population of 2 million in a stranglehold. People are forced to crowd into an area comprising less than 50% of the enclave's total territory. Virtually every family faces the challenge of securing shelter, while over 70% of Palestinian children under 2 years of age are suffering from malnutrition. Other key provisions of the peace plan likewise remain on paper, including the operationalization of the National Gaza Administration Committee and the deployment of the International Stabilization Force in the Strip. It is equally obvious that there is currently no question of any practical steps regarding the potential launch of reconstruction efforts in the sector. Madam President, let us stick to the facts. Over recent months, we have heard that progress on these points would become possible immediately after Hamas agrees to begin a phased disarmament in conjunction with the withdrawal of IDF units. Yet Israel has no intention of withdrawing the IDF from the Strip. Nikolai Mladenov also underscored the crucial nature of this principle of reciprocity in his May report to the members of the UN Security Council. We note the efforts of the High Representative of the Peace Council for Gaza to prepare a corresponding roadmap to which the Islamic movement agreed, whereas the Israeli leadership responded with a public refusal. We regret that some of those present in this council chamber, for one reason or another, continue to gloss over the real picture of what is happening around Gaza. Perhaps they should listen to the voices of reason from those countries that are also members of the Peace Council, to which reference was also made today. Specifically, we have in mind the recent statement by the foreign ministers of the Arab Muslim 8 of August 16th, who collectively condemned Israel's stance and laid full responsibility on West Jerusalem for undermining efforts to stabilize the situation, both in Gaza and across the rest of the occupied Palestinian territory in the West Bank. Public statements by prominent Israeli political figures, along with the government's plans and concrete steps, confirm West Jerusalem's complete lack of any desire to move toward de-escalation or to abide by the international legal framework of the Middle East settlement. Israel's ministers of national security and finance speak openly of the need to kill 30 to 40 Gazans daily and to pursue the expulsion of the enclave's residents with an eye toward re-establishing settlements there. At the same time, we note negative developments on the ground in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, where the Israeli authorities are systematically pursuing a policy of tightening their administrative and legal control in violation of Security Council Resolution 2334. The settlement activity of the Netanyahu government is breaking all records, a fact on which Ramez Al-Akbarov regularly briefs us. Of particular concern is the E1 plan approved in 2025, which will slice the Palestinian territories in two and put an end to the territorial integrity of the state of Palestine. Alongside many responsible nations, Russia condemns West Jerusalem's provocative course and calls for an end to settlement expansion, whether within the framework of the E1 project or in other parts of the occupied territory. No less alarming is the fact that the policy of creating irreversible realities on the ground is accompanied by an unprecedented level of settler violence, unceasing IDF military raids in the West Bank, severe restrictions on Palestinian movement, and the infringement of their right of access to basic services. In this connection, we cannot fail to mention West Jerusalem's destructive course regarding UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees, which remains the backbone entity for providing comprehensive assistance to both the inhabitants of the occupied Palestinian territory and Palestinian refugees throughout the region. We call on the Israeli authorities to fully honor their obligations as an occupying power, to cease arbitrary raids on the UN agency facilities, specifically the Kalandia Training Center, and to ensure overall unhindered operations for UN personnel within the scope of their assigned mandate. We remain convinced that the agency's mission must continue until a final peaceful settlement of the conflict is achieved, premised on the establishment of an independent, sovereign state of Palestine within the 1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as its capital, living side by side in peace and security with Israel. We consistently proceed from the premise that achieving lasting peace and equal security is possible and necessary only through the resumption of direct dialogue between the warring parties on all remaining core issues, based on the extensive international legal framework and anchored in the two-state solution. As ever, our country stands ready to engage with all constructively minded partners to rectify this historical injustice and to support the regional actors themselves in their pursuit of a prosperous Middle East free from crises. Thank you.